for fantasy. Take the time and you'll get what you need.
You're listening to the Alchemical Tech Revolution, and I am your host, Wayne McRoy. Good evening, everyone. Tonight we're going to discuss the occult foundations of globalism. Did you ever wonder where the idea of globalism came from? Who really was pushing this promotion of internationalism, of world government, a new world order? It's the same old foundations. The same old New World Order, as I like to call it sometimes. All these many things have come to fruition through many of these years in the same underground occult streams as they were always carried forward from, all these ideas. And this is no different. So where do we get the idea of international government, world government? All of these ideas that we see that are so prominent in the world today, the push is on for this global one world government, as we see here. And it's not only that, it's the whole idea of ecumenicalism as well. The idea of the merging of all religious ideals into one as well. One world government, one world currency, one world religious order. All these things were set up and promulgated by these secret society groups that have brought forward many of their teachings and the perversions of the teachings of the ancient mystery schools into the modern era, and they have set up shop in many of the key places in the world where they can have influence on policy. And one such place where they set up shop, where they have a huge amount of influence, is within the auspices of the United Nations. Most people are largely unaware the United Nations has most of their publications produced through a company called Lucis Trust, formerly known as Lucifer Trust, and this is a theosophical organization. And many of the key players within the theosophical movement have also had a say in world affairs through the auspices of the United Nations. They've had some input into things at the United Nations. And tonight we're going to look at some of the early portion of that. This goes back to before the foundation of the United Nations, going back to the League of Nations beforehand. Now, this whole one world government idea is far older than that, but many of the groups that brought this forward are the same through the years, and they failed with their first go at it with the League of Nations, but they made up for it with the foundation of the United Nations and setting up shop there in New York City. So, with that being the case, tonight we're going to read from a book titled Theosophy and World Problems, being the let me read this title for you. Just a second. It's one of those long, lengthy titles that these people like to give to their books. It's Theosophy and World Problems, being the 4 convention lectures delivered in Benares at the 46th anniversary of the Theosophical Society from December 1921. This was written by Annie Besant, C. Jinarajadasa, J. Krishnamurti, and G.S. Arundale. And this was published by the Theosophical Publishing House, a branch of the College of Agriculture, the University of C Library. University of, what is this? C. It just has a capital C. University of California. Library. That's where this one is from. And Annie Besant, for those who don't know, was a key player in the Theosophical Society and had a lot of say at Lucis Trust, or Lucifer Trust, as it used to be called before they changed the name, when people started raising their eyebrows about the name of this publishing house that was the one responsible for printing most of the United Nations doctrines and their policy papers and such like that. And this group, this Lucis Trust, exists still today within the United Nations building in New York City. It's a very telling thing. This is where they set up shop. And the Theosophists are the ones who got many of their ideologies involved in the unification of this group of the United Nations and putting forward the policies for it. So with that being said, we're going to read into a section here of the book titled Theosophy and Internationalism. And we'll get to the roots of where it is that this idea of one world government comes from and why it is they believe that such a thing is a necessity and why they work so hard for it and what it is that underlies this, the occult stream of knowledge that underlies all of this. That's what we're going to get into here in their own words in black and white on the page. This is not me saying these things. This is absolutely 100% their own words, their own ideas, their own ideologies, the very things that they believe, and the very values that they try to push forward into the world and push on the world, as it were. So let's get into the reading here. So, Theosophy and Internationalism. Theosophy points out to us and teaches that all paths lead but to one God. Gonna pause for a moment here, folks. So the very first sentence here, some people will have a problem with, take issue with. So let's leave it at that for now. So this is what Theosophy teaches, that there are many paths that lead to one God. Now this is the antithesis to what Christian theology teaches, but let's not really get into that tonight, because in order for us to get to the meat of the matter, we have to understand the belief systems of those who have positioned themselves in these places of power in this world where they can set policy based upon their belief systems, and this is absolutely one of their key belief systems within the Theosophical Society, as well as within the other secret society groups. It's all the same teachings, as I point out all the time, all through every single one of them. They just put different lipstick on a pig, and they may call different concepts by different names, but it's all the same teachings, regardless of all of that they push forward. So let's continue reading here. I'll start it all over, just because I read one sentence and had to pause already. Theosophy points out to us and teaches that all paths lead but to one God. It teaches us, whether we be Christians, Hindus, Mohammedans, or Buddhists, that to what religion we belong does not matter, that God is in essence eternally and perpetually the same, although he expresses himself in all forms of belief and worship. A nation is the expression of individuals, and individuals are the embodiment of the divine. Consequently, all nations, whatever color and degree of evolution they represent, are one in their divine essence. And I'm going to pause again for a moment there, folks. Notice already that the Theosophists, Annie Besant, and the others who contributed to this work are already pointing out differences among the people, whether it be the color of their skin or what degree of evolution they represent, because all of these secret society groups, they teach that there are some quote-unquote races that are superior and some that are inferior to others. This is not me saying this. This is absolutely what they teach. We've gone through examples of this in the past, on past episodes of this broadcast. Reading directly from their own words, they always make this claim. They claim that some races are lagging further behind in the evolutionary process than others. And this is what they base the foundations of a lot of their ideas upon. So once again, they're already touching upon that concept here, because for these people, these occultists, these dark occultists who run things at the top of the power structure, it always falls back to race. Thus, they had to further ramp up the racial divide here in the U.S. and around the world over the course of the past couple years. Got to create all that tension, you see, because it's all about playing this evolutionary process one against the other here. That's what it is in their view. So this is how they see it. So the claim here, again, they say, consequently all nations, whatever color and degree of evolution they represent, are one in their divine essence. Thus, we should imagine that every thinking man and woman would be an internationalist. And I'm going to pause for a moment here again, folks. So they're claiming, despite the fact that some peoples are less evolved than others, they should all be interested in joining the collective and raising their evolutionary bar collectively along with the others. So that's what the inference is here. They didn't say that in so many words, but that's what they're inferring here, that it should be in everyone's best interests to be part of the larger group. So with that being the case, we can see the games that have been played here. So let's continue reading. Unfortunately, this is not the case, as is shown by the innumerable wars which take place, and by the continuous strife and competition existing in every department of life. This has been caused by the lack of true feeling and deep thinking with regard to all the real problems of life, problems of vital importance because they concern the life and happiness of every human being. We do not feel truly because we have not acquired the power of putting ourselves in the place of other people. We dare not think deeply. Unfortunately, this is not the case, as is shown by the innumerable wars which take place and by the continuous strife and competition existing in every department of life. This has been caused by the lack of true feeling and deep thinking with regard to all the real problems of life, problems of vital importance, because they concern the life and happiness of every human being. We do not feel truly because we have not acquired the power of putting ourselves in the place of other people. We dare not think deeply because such thoughts must bring about change, and we are afraid of change lest it should cause us suffering. We Theosophists have got to play a large part in the reconstruction of the world, and to this end we must learn both to think and to feel in a new way. The keynote of the New Age is internationalism. What are the obstacles which at present stand in the way of realizing this ideal? And I'm going to pause for a moment right there, folks. So in case you didn't catch that, the Theosophists have given themselves the job of playing a large part in what they call the reconstruction of the world. Now, I don't know if you catch the connotation there or not, without it being pointed out, but in order for reconstruction to take place, first, the existing structure needs to be torn down. So do you understand what's being done in the world today? The Theosophists, these dark occultists who run things, and it's not just the Theosophists, it's all of the different members of the various secret societies, the topmost levels of all of them, joined together have these common goals and purposes. So their whole objective is to tear down the world order and erect a new world order in its place. So in order for Reconstruction to take place, first, you have to tear down the existing structure. So that's what's being pointed out here in a not so obvious way. They're very subtle about how they say things, but if you read between the lines, you understand what's being said here. And this is no different. So they assigned themselves the objective, the goal, of creating this new age. And the keynote of the new age, according to them, is internationalism. We could substitute in the word globalism, if we must. But you get the picture here, right? So now the next portion here is asking, well, what are the fundamental obstacles which at present stand in the way of realizing this ideal? There are 4 fundamental questions which, more than anything else, influence the thought, the character, and action of men. These are education, religion, business, and patriotism. Let us examine these through the eyes of a real theosophist. But let me first define what I mean by a real theosophist. And I'm going to pause for a second here, folks. So once again, now, Besant and the others who contributed to this, I'm not sure which one wrote this portion or if they all contributed to this portion of the writing here, but they're going to define for us what do they consider a quote-unquote real theosophist. You see, this is an attempt to harbor what's called plausible deniability here. Because anything that goes wrong in the name of the Theosophical Society or the Theosophists, they could shrug their shoulders and say, meh, that wasn't a real Theosophist. You see, that wasn't somebody who really understood the teachings. That was just some pretender who thought that they understood what we're all about. You see, and this is how these secret society groups work. They like their plausible deniability. They like to keep their hands clean of any ugly dirt that happens to show up, although they're more than happy to dish out that dirt. So that's what's being done here. They're, once again, taking credit for all the good things that come about according to what happens with their policies, but at the same token, they're stepping away from anything bad that happens, claiming that wasn't because of any true theosophist. That was some pretender. In name only. Theosophist in name only, or substitute in whatever other secret society group you would like, or denomination here. All these occultists have the same type of an attitude, these dark occultists who run things. They want to be lauded for the good things that they do and take credit for those, and at the same token, any negative things, they want to shift the blame away from themselves, you see. So this is how they operate, and that's what's being done here. So take notice to the 4 primary fundamental questions that they need to understand here. The 4 fundamental questions that influence the thought and character and action of men regard things like education, religion, business, and patriotism. They listed them off here. And, before they get into that in the writing here, they're going to define what they think is a real theosophist. So let's continue reading here. We can all talk of theosophy in high-sounding terms, can read and discuss its philosophy, but how many of us can act and live theosophy in the ordinary commonplace things of daily life? We know what we should be, and yet, like all other human beings, we are too feeble to carry out that knowledge. We lack the essential thing, which is the will to overcome all obstacles, and to live the things we know to be true. So by a real theosophist, I mean one who lives theosophy and does not merely talk about it. Gonna pause for a moment there, folks. So once again, we see here, this is double entendre when it comes to plausible deniability here. Here's a second layer of plausible deniability. So they're claiming a real theosophist is somebody who lives theosophy and doesn't just merely talk about it. So define that. What is that? What does that look like? A person that's living the life of theosophy. It's not something that's clearly defined. It's a very vague term. So therefore, they can make the claim, well, that's not a true theosophist, and they can't really define for you what a true theosophist is. It's a very poor definition, and it's a vague definition given here on purpose, for the purposes of plausible deniability, and likewise for the purpose that nobody can live to all the precepts of these alleged groups and live the lifestyle that they claim. That's the whole thing with all of these different occult fraternities and these occult groups. They all make all these grandiose promises of, power and knowledge and become a better person and walk the walk and live the lifestyle. And if you do, if you're just quite good enough, then maybe, just maybe, you'll have some kind of a breakthrough. But you're never quite good enough, see? That's the true secret at the top of these secret society groups. You're never quite good enough to get to that upper tier, to be regarded in that way. You see, you're always lacking in some spiritual quality or something according to those higher up the power pyramid. And that's the whole thing. You're really not necessarily lacking anything. It's the nature of the control system they put in place. They want you to feel like you're not doing good enough, that you're not quite good enough. You're not a real theosophist in this case. You see, no matter how closely you adhere to the teachings and stuff that they give you and try your best, it's never quite good enough. So you're always grasping for just that little next nibble of the secret knowledge, of the secret teaching, of the next teaching that will help maybe bring you closer to the divine or to the, level that you want to get to within this group. That's how they work. They dangle the carrot in front of your face and lead you down the path to destruction. That's what these secret society groups do. That's what they've devolved into over time. Now, don't get me wrong. Many of the original teachings are not evil or wicked in and of themselves. They have been twisted and perverted through the course of time by those who seek to use some of these different methods of knowledge to control others and to set themselves in positions of power over others. And that's what's happened here. And the Theosophical Society is no different. And they always set up this border of plausible deniability, as I discussed here. So that's what they're talking about. So they claim here, so by a real theosophist, I mean one who lives theosophy and does not merely talk about it. So that's their vague definition of what a real theosophist is. Now, with that in mind, let's continue reading and see what they have to say about the subjects that they were talking about prior here. Now, what should the theosophical attitude towards the four subjects I have mentioned be? Let us first examine education. True education must teach self-respect, the realization of our own inner greatness. Gonna pause for a moment here, folks. Every child gets a trophy. Your feelings. Do you see what's been done here? Now, remember, this was written in 1921. This is over 100 years old. Look at how they've transformed our education model in this country and how it reflects these ideas now. It's all about self-respect, the realization of our own inner greatness. We're all good enough. You see, we're all great. Me, I. Consumerism, all of these various things that have come about. Indoctrination, your feelings over actually learning something. Your feelings are what matters more. That's what they're talking about here when they're talking about education. So they say true education must teach self-respect, the realization of our own inner greatness. How does this education existing in the world today help to realize this ideal? First, take a typical case of an educated man in the West. I have in my mind a friend of mine in England, a man who has followed the usual course of education of an English gentleman. He has been to a preparatory school, then to a public school, and finally to Woolwich. Woolwich is a training college for officers, where they turn out the regular type of young soldier, who goes to India and to other parts of the world to assist in building an empire. Kipling would hail my friend as the ideal Englishman and empire builder. He is clean and nice looking, wears well cut clothes, is straight and honest, polite and suave, a good friend with a high opinion of his own merits. The kind of self respect which he has learnt from his education is to regard himself as superior to the men of all other races. Now let us examine him from the standpoint of Theosophy. And I'm going to pause for a moment here, folks. So you see here, do you see the pre-echoes of the ideas that are present in our education system today? Things that they teach us, like, there exists this white privilege and these various things. So you see the inherent idea here, the pre-echoes of ideas like white privilege and like critical race theory already echoed back here in the Theosophical Society through the Theosophical circles here in their quest for united one world government here. So it says, now let us examine him from the standpoint of Theosophy. So it points out the flaws in the system that they had, the classical education they were given. They say that it promotes empire building and things like racial superiority of one over the other. Now let's see what their ideology is. So let's read on. His ideas are narrow and limited in spite of the fact that he has read many books and has passed many examinations. He is incapable of grasping a big international idea or of looking at any question except from an English point of view. I have often tried to make him understand what an Indian feels in being ruled over by another nation, and when I have tried to explain to him that it was a degradation for any nation to submit to foreign rule, his answer was, "My dear fellow, we do you good." He was incapable of looking at life through my eyes, through my consciousness. This lack of imagination, of the power of putting himself in another man's shoes, is very characteristic of the Englishman. Evils must be brought right under his nose before he will try to remedy them, and he seems incapable of using the creative power of the imagination to picture conditions which he has not seen. To return to my friend, he would call himself highly civilized, yet his chief purpose in life is to enjoy himself, to have a good time. In seeking his enjoyment, he does not consciously wish to hurt anybody, and would probably be very much surprised if you told him that by his enjoyment he causes suffering to other people. He is incapable of realizing that by his selfishness, by his contentment with the littlenesses of life, by his small conception of happiness, he is directly injuring his fellow man. Gonna pause for a second here, folks. So, once again, we also see the pre-echoing of the idea that just the mere fact of you breathing air and existing is a plague upon the earth and you cause suffering to others. This is the foundational type of ideology that underlies the thought systems of these policymakers in the world. They see everybody as being a problem. Just the mere act of you breathing air and eating food. See, they have a name for us. They call us the useless eaters. You see, the ones that don't belong to their little group, that aren't in the big club, so to say. The ones that use up all the precious limited resources. This is the kind of idea that underlies all of this. That anybody who belongs to this middle class type of mentality here, that's educated and seems, to have been taught many of the traditional ways and just wants to go about and enjoy their life, well, in seeking their own pleasure and their own enjoyment and gratifying their own needs and wants, they cause harm to others. That's the implication here. This also aligns with the teachings that come about from this green movement that we see, this whole environmentalist wacko movement that's been going on. The mere act of breathing the air is harmful. You're creating carbon dioxide, you see. Carbon emissions. It's bad. So this is the kind of ideology that this leads to. So it's very subtle here in the beginning phases of how they present it. But this is actually what this has led to in the modern era. You see, it's always this slow roll with these people. They do long-term planning. So they shift these ideas and these attitudes slowly over time. So let's continue reading, though. The savage in Africa has the same desire, enjoyment, but he is more honest and simple in his selfishness. Gonna pause for a moment there, folks. Now, if that doesn't sound like a racist statement, I don't know what does. But yeah, I mean, so he calls the people in Africa, he calls them savages and says they have the same desire, but, their enjoyment, but it's more honest and simple in their selfishness. Really? That just... I don't know. I lack words to describe that in the modern era, but let's continue reading. He says quite openly, I desire such and such a pleasure, and I mean to gratify my desire no matter who suffers. Gonna pause for a moment there, folks. So this is a broad generalization and a stereotype being applied here. This is a ridiculous statement on the face of it, but this is what they teach in these secret society groups. I'm reading their own words verbatim from the page here. This is how they believe and see different peoples of the world and think they're doing them a favor by instituting one world government and taking care of them, because you see they're foolish, they're animalistic in their thinking. They don't think of future scenarios, and they don't think about what's in their own best interest, you see, for evolutionary purposes and for the purposes of enlightenment and all these spiritual connotations. So it's up to these people, these dark occultists who run things, to do the thinking for them and make decisions for them in their best interest, of course, for the greater good. That's one of their favorite phrases, for the greater good. So let's continue reading there. My friend would not express his feeling so crudely, but the result of his life upon his fellow men is much the same as that of the savage. Western education has produced superficially good manners and a covering of literary and artistic expression, but it has not in any way changed the real man within. He remains as crude in his ideals, as narrow and selfish in his outlook, as the uncivilized man. This kind of education forbids the realization of any real spirit of internationalism. It makes for limitation and narrowness of outlook, and does not sufficiently cultivate the imagination. Now let us examine our Indian education through the eyes of the Theosophist. I wish to consider this subject quite impersonally, and therefore I may have to say some things which are not pleasing to my audience, but if we are going to change conditions, we must be prepared to hear the truth, even if it pains us. Let us take an average Indian student. The first impression that he makes upon us is that he is gentle, modest, and obedient in the presence of his elders. When an older man speaks, the student listens and accepts unquestioningly. The spirit of the young Indian has been so long suppressed by his elders and by the ruling race that his self-respect has become submerged almost to the point of disappearance. The life of the Indian student has been largely limited within the four walls of his school and college, his sole aim and ambition being to obtain a post as clerk in an office. The creative spirit, which is divine, has largely been crushed out of us, but now, with a new awakening of national consciousness and self-respect, the student is adopting an aggressive rudeness towards superiors, equals and inferiors alike. It does not so greatly matter if we are rude to our superiors, because it merely shows us to be fools. If we are aggressive and rude to our equals, they retaliate and hit us back. But to be aggressive and rude to our inferiors is, to my mind, passing the limits of decency. Even Theosophists, I am sorry to say, are guilty of this rudeness, and some of them treat their servants in the most extraordinary manner. The other day I met a servant whom I had known in England, and naturally I shook hands with him when I saw him here. People looked as surprised at this action as if it had lowered my self-respect. They failed to realize that self-respect exists only in the man who respects himself and is ready to respect others. Rudeness is no mark of self-respect, but the reverse. In India, we need to cultivate the spirit of adventure and to show manly strength and courage while retaining our tradition of courtesy and gentleness. And I'm going to pause for a moment here, folks. So once again, we see some of the echoes, the pre-echoes of the whole racial divide issue once again coming to light, where they're fanning the flames here of something in this type of thinking that they're putting forward through the Theosophical Society. They're teaching this inequality idea, and that it's necessary for us all to have equality. And we need to find balance. And all these things don't necessarily sound bad, right? We need to have balance. But at the same token, the way they've gone with it is a total 180 from what is healthy for a human being. Let's put it that way. But let's continue reading here. If we are to bring about true internationalism, we must change education both in the West and in the East. And I'm going to pause for a moment here, folks. So we see the disparity between Eastern cultures and Western cultures being pointed out here in their education system, in their traditions, in their values, in their morality, in their mannerisms, in their manners. So that's what's being pointed out. And the writer here is pointing out that we need to transform both the Eastern and the Western cultures into one type of culture. We need to join them together under this internationalist banner. One size fits all, new world order, you see here. It's trying to unify together one system, rather than taking these two different approaches to education and various other things. They want one system in place. They want one world standard. That's what it's all about, setting a standard and then performing this standard everywhere across the board, whether it works or not. And it's not necessarily the best fit for everyone. But this is what they do. So let's go ahead and we'll continue reading here. We must take all that is best in the West and not despise it, as we do at present, and we must transplant all that is best in the East to the West. Western people must cultivate something of that gentleness which characterizes the Indian, and both East and West will need more imagination if they are to bring about great changes in the world. Western people are full of energy, and if they could add imagination to their energy, they would accomplish wonderful things. We must also transplant compassion, not the compassion of a mother to her child, but the compassion that understands all and forgives all. From the West, we must learn independence, the power to stand against the crowd that disagrees with us, which is opposed to us in every ideal, in every conception. Another thing which we lack most sadly in India is esprit de corps, which means cooperation. Gonna pause for a moment there, folks. Esprit de corps. Esprit is spelled E-S-P-R-I-T. De, D-E, corps, C-O-R-P-S. Now, if you want to translate this phrase differently than how the author here of this work, the writer here, translates it, he translates this phrase, esprit de corps, meaning cooperation. But if you want to look into the etymology of those words, esprit de corps, it doesn't take a lot of imagination. Many of you probably already translated it in your head as I'm sitting here reading it. Esprit is spirit, de, of, corps, corpse, death. Spirit of death doesn't mean cooperation. And he has that in italics in the book here, esprit de corps, which he says means cooperation. Now, this is wordplay being used here, and this is a signal for those in the know. They have this phrase written in italics. They do that for a reason. This phrase is pointed out, and it's to be viewed separately from the rest of the text to get the meta meaning imbued in the text here. So, spirit of death. That's what they're pushing in the education system and in pushing this stuff together, because we exist in a culture of death, a death-based culture. That's what all of our society is built upon. The ideas of corporation, death, ideas, you see, it's inherent in the way things have been set up in the modern era. It's all based upon this cult of death. That's where their ideals come from. And we've gone through some of this before, but I just wanted to point that out. So let's read on. So the author here claims that phrase means cooperation. We can all cooperate with what we like. We must learn to cooperate with what we do not like, to put our little feelings aside when the good of the whole is involved. I'm going to pause for a moment there, folks. The greater good, you see, here it is. You have to accept what you don't like and cooperate with it for the greater good. That's what's being said here, because you don't know better. See, these people know better than you. They have the divine right to rule over you. This is what they think. This is what they claim. This is what they believe. They think they're on a higher evolutionary ladder than you are, and therefore they should lead you, and they should make you do the things you don't want to do, like you make your children eat their vegetables because you know it's good for them. They don't like it, though, and they don't want to, so sometimes you have to force them to eat their vegetables, you see? It's the same kind of idea put forward here by these one-worlders. That's what they think. So let's go ahead and continue reading. In an English public school, the spirit of cooperation is dominant. Going to pause for a moment here, folks. The spirit of cooperation is dominant, it says here. And remember, if you replace the phrase spirit of cooperation with the literal translation, the more literal translation of esprit de corps that he gives above, it would be spirit of death. So keep that in mind. If a few boys fight in the morning, their private quarrel is forgotten in the field in the afternoon, when they are playing for the honor of the school. They then are one. We lack that spirit. We let our feelings interfere with the duties of life. We cannot afford to neglect the things which Western people can teach us. We should not despise them as we do at present because they have a white skin. They cannot help being white, and someday we may also be born into a white-skinned nation. Gonna pause for a moment here, folks. So, I'm not sure if this was Krishnamurti that wrote this. I'm assuming this portion of it was written by Krishnamurti because of the connotations he's making here. So, that being the case, we see here he's saying that someday they may also be born into a white-skinned nation, pushing the idea of the evolutionary process as believed by the mystery schools and by these secret society groups, much different than what you've been taught in school about Darwinian evolution. So they think that, these other races may be further along on the evolutionary path. And although they do things and work in ways they don't agree with, they recognize that it's for the greater good, and we need to cooperate with that. That's what the author here is saying, and I'm assuming it was probably Krishnamurti that wrote this portion. But I'm not sure on that. It's one of the ones, I'm sure, with the very Eastern-sounding last names. So, that being the case, let's continue on, though. If India is meant to do great things in the world, she must have control of all the forces which make for progress. I would suggest that one method by which this internationalism could be brought about would be the establishment of colleges all over the world, which would exchange students with the national schools and colleges of other countries, and thus create international relations between the young. Gonna pause for a moment there, folks. Exchange students. Did you ever wonder where that idea came from, foreign exchange students? Well, here you go. Right here out of the Theosophical Society. All brought to you by the secret society groups. Let's continue on. Thus, young people would be properly trained to hold these larger ideas. First, establish the spirit of goodwill, and then send Indian students abroad and take Western students into your Indian schools. We must also teach history in the schools so as to promote admiration for the good points of other nations and their special characteristics. Nowadays, history is a record of wars in which one nation beats the other, and there is always the superior race dominating and the inferior race suffering. That is history as it is understood at present. In certain historical books, naturally, the other spirit, which presents the right attitude, is also misrepresented, but unfortunately they are in a minority. Now let us take up my second subject, religion. So I'm going to pause for a moment here, folks. So education, it's about indoctrinating the young early on about being accepting of these different ideologies, these different racial groups, all of these different ideas. Being tolerant of others, tolerance, acceptance, diversity, all of these things pre-echoed here in the Theosophical writings right here. And these are some of the foundations that have developed into our modern school system, taken to an extreme, you see, because they always take it to the extreme, folks. That's one of the big things, the big key points about these secret society groups. They take things to the absolute extreme, always, when they're left go unfettered. That's exactly what they do. So now let's go ahead and continue, because now he's touching upon the idea of religion. Now let us take up my second subject, religion. That is the point on which I feel most strongly, and if I exaggerate, as I said before, it is because I want to kill what should be killed, as well as to create and heal. And I'm going to pause for a moment there, folks. Does that sound like the words of a peaceful movement or a peaceful group? Somebody that really wants the best interests of mankind? Somebody that has the best interests of mankind in their hearts of all people? Somebody that claims here that they want to kill what should be killed, as well as to create and heal? That's a contradictory statement, isn't it? And this is what we talk about here when we talk about the way that they teach within these secret society groups. They teach in paradoxes. So once again, they're talking about destruction along with reconstruction here in that regard. And they have very strong feelings towards religion, organized religion, especially Western organized religion, and most especially Christianity. They have a real hatred, a strong-rooted hatred for traditional Christianity within these secret society groups, folks. It's there. It's true. It's a definite thing. So let's read on here. Religion should teach the right international spirit. But at present, while it teaches us the right attitude towards God, it does not, unfortunately, teach us the right attitude towards our brother. Gonna pause for a moment here, folks. Did you catch that? It says religion should teach the right international spirit. It should teach people to be obedient to one world government, you see. That's the implication being made here. Religion should teach that the state is God, and you should follow the dictates of the state. Did you catch that more subtle kind of attitude there? So it says that it teaches the right attitude towards God, but does not teach the right attitude towards our brother. So they claim that the state would be our brother, our big brother, wouldn't it? Let's continue reading. Men treat those who are below them, or who are of a different color or caste, or who hold different opinions from their own, as something quite different from themselves. Each religion, it does not matter which, tries to dominate the other, and from that domination arises the spirit of aggressive proselytism, which is an immense barrier to internationalism. The priests of each religion who should be the teachers and leaders of the people, want to work only for themselves. They want what we all want: comfort, pleasure, and all the amenities of life. Religion is no more real to them than to the rest of the people. A degraded priesthood is the curse of every religion, and yet we all encourage its existence by our acquiescence. Unfortunately, modern religion deals chiefly with the trivialities of ceremonial and the times and seasons when it should be performed, rather than with trying to develop the right attitude towards our neighbor, whether he be brown or white, Brahmana or pariah, aristocrat or plebeian. Hinduism teaches that Brahmana the way to nirvana, to attain moksha, but it does not teach him, except in theory, to be forgotten in practice, that God is equally present in the pariah as in the Brahmana, and that therefore he should show the outcast the same reverence as he would show to God. Gonna pause for a moment here, folks. So he's making the correlation here, in a very subtle way of saying so, that man is God. Mankind is God. And this is the great lie told in the Garden of Eden. Man can be God. He can be as gods. This is inherent in all the New Age philosophy and stuff that's come about. It's inherent throughout all of these secret society groups. Man can become God. Man is God, you see. They take it to an extreme, all right? Now, we are all a fractal image of God because we're made in his image. That does not make us God or gods, but they take it to the extreme. They always push these things to the extreme. And that's kind of what's being done here. So he's now saying, in a way that sounds kind of nice, that man is God, so man should have the same kind of reverence towards other men as he would for God. So once again, setting up the state as the God, in a sense here. So let's continue reading. Mr. Lloyd George probably goes to church when he thinks fit, when he is not playing golf on Sunday morning, and imagines that he is a very devout Christian, pious, and all that is respectable. But if I told him that he was not a Christian, he would be extremely offended, and yet he acts in a most unchristian manner in politics. Love your neighbor as yourself, says Christ, and Mr. Lloyd George will accept that statement in his private house and for his own nation. But love your neighbor nation as you love your own nation, he will consider as betrayal, as disloyal to his own nation and to his own country. This shows us that religion accepts a double standard of morality, one for the individual as part of a particular nation, and the other for the individual as part of the world. Religion teaches that to shoot your neighbor is wrong, that is, if he is your blood brother or fellow countryman. Legally, such a crime is counted as murder and punished by hanging. But to shoot your neighbor of a different color, of a different nationality, of a different flag, is an act which not only religion but the whole world praises, and such action is decorated and rewarded with the blessings of the church. Gonna pause for a moment here, folks. Do you see how delusional these people are? Now, I know atrocities were committed in the name of the church during things like the Inquisition and the Crusades and stuff like that. But that is not a reflection of what Christ taught or the Christian religion itself. And do you see how they conflate these two things? The organized church is not the same as the relationship between man and God. You see here, all organized religions have become a conduit, a vehicle that has been used for the purposes of maintaining power or pushing agendas and this kind of thing. They've all been infiltrated, no matter how good of intentions and stuff they have. They've all fallen victim to some of this. And that being the case, we see here that this is a conflation that they make within these secret schools. It's all part of that bad taste in their mouth they have for Christianity in particular. But they claim these things that religion has this double standard, and that's not necessarily the case, is it? People are fallible. We're flawed. We all sin. And that's why we have things written down like the Ten Commandments, and why we have these absolute moral standards that are standards that can be accepted, natural law, moral laws that are universal, that we understand to a certain degree, but we don't always obey those laws. And that doesn't mean that the religion or the religious idea itself has a double standard. It means we're all flawed. And that's why these laws were written, to point out to us the fact that we are all flawed and we can't possibly, on our own or of our own volition or power, live to the standard of these laws. And that's why we needed an intercessor, you see. So this is a split between the philosophies of the mystery schools and the secret occult fraternities and what would be considered mainline religion or mainline theology. This is the difference between theosophy and theology. They have this wrong assumption that they make about religious ideals themselves, religious standards, you see. And they apply this to the things that they teach and work towards. So that being the case, we see this, and that's what's being pointed out here. But let's continue reading so you could hear this in their own words. This attitude naturally creates a god with a national flag. The idea of various gods sitting in various departments of life, each ruling a different nation and waving a different flag, makes us smile. But ridiculous as it may appear when baldly stated, the result of so-called patriotism works out in that most absurd manner. The League of Nations, which is now sitting at Geneva, instead of being dominated by ethics and religion, is dominated by fear, greed, and the principle of grabbing. Some little time ago, I attended a meeting of the League at Geneva and wrote down my impressions as follows. Going to pause for a moment here, folks. Remember, this was written in 1921. This is when the League of Nations was falling out of grace and falling apart. This is prior to the United Nations being founded. But I assure you, the United Nations was founded upon these ideals put forward by the Theosophical Society, as was much of the League of Nations. It's all the same players at the top of the power structure that put these things in place. It's just the world wasn't quite ready yet for this idea. They were pushing it a little bit ahead of its time with the League of Nations. And they've kind of hit the same kind of thing today, where their plans are falling behind schedule, so they start to push a little harder. But sometimes they wind up having to wait and bide their time until they could engineer the masses in a social way, socially engineer the masses into acceptance or capitulation to the things that they want, the ideas they want. And usually that takes several generations. So that's what was done here between the time of the League of Nations and the United Nations. The indoctrination had begun then. But so let's continue on here. And remember, the writer here is claiming they attended a meeting of the League of Nations at Geneva and wrote down their impressions. And these were the writer's impressions. I would not have it understood that I am against the existing League of Nations. Indeed, far from it. It is one of the unexpected and beneficent results of the war. But only let us not blind ourselves to the imperfections of the League, for then only can we help to perfect it. One of the great disadvantages of the present League is that it is not a league of all nations, and that an authoritative spiritual force is sadly lacking. I am not one of those who would cut down a fruit tree because it does not grow fast enough and give forth fruit, but I desire only to examine the tree to ascertain if it is really a fruit tree. I am convinced of the capabilities of the League, but they are too limited. Not one of us would be silly enough to deny the potentialities of the League, and it would be equally absurd to say that the League of Nations, now sitting at Geneva, is perfect, and that it can function with united and international will. As far as I could judge and from what I could gather from some of the delegates, each representative is mainly concerned with the interests of his own country. So that the true spirit of internationalism is yet to be evolved. I'm going to pause for a moment here, folks. Notice he uses the word evolved. And notice that he's pointing out that, yeah, it's not perfect, but it needs just a spiritual authority to it to kind of bring about the change we really need, you see. So that's the impression given by the author here. And he says, so that the true spirit of internationalism is yet to be evolved. Let's continue on. Indeed, we should be more surprised if it already existed. I am quite certain that the majority of the League would scoff at the idea that religion and politics must go hand in hand if the latter is to be a spiritual force in the world. For them, as for the majority of politicians of today, politics must needs be kept in a watertight compartment, lest such a vague unreality as religion should corrupt them, and if perchance the politicians happen to be religious, they would no doubt be afraid that the purity of their religion should be polluted by politics. They all, or at least some of them, go to church every Sunday to offer up prayers to their particular deity, who after Sunday retires to reappear again only the following Sunday. So this game of hide-and-seek with God is played in all departments of life, and particularly so in politics. I think it was Gladstone who affirmed that the two great interests of mankind were politics and religion, and one can unhesitantly declare that so long as these two great forces are kept asunder, we shall have neither a lasting peace nor a contented conscience. With this union must go the realization of the oneness of all religions, for then we shall escape the many abominations that are committed in the name of religion, and the inhuman exploitation of a younger race for the benefit of so-called civilization, which has been the characteristic of modern politics. The realization that all human beings are children of God will alone give us the right to be arbiters of our fates and to be the builders of a greater and happier civilization. Now let us take up the third subject, business. Going to pause for a moment here before we get into business here, folks. So you see the idea that religion is a problem in the way of internationalism, as they call it here, or globalism, one world government. So it has to be transformed. That's what's being said here. They need to change the attitudes towards religion. They need to change the precepts of religion. They need to bring all of it into union, into oneness of all religions, as he says here. For then, when it's all brought into oneness, and this ecumenicalism, or however it's pronounced, is brought into being, where all religious ideals fall together and are accepted as being many different paths to the same God. When all these things are accepted and offered and put together in a way where there's one universal religion, then, and only then, can an international political structure exist. So it's all about bringing together the religions of the world into something acceptable to all of them and unifying them under the banner of the state. So the marriage of the church and state, and we've gone through this before, the union of church and state, that's what it's all about. It's a type of alchemical marriage, if you want to get into the old natural science way of thinking about it, the alchemy involved. It's creating this one structure that corresponds both to religion and spiritualism and government and law, all together, combined in this one utility, in this one world government of sorts, all run by the same people, all with the same precepts to all of it, the same one-size-fits-all mentality for all of it. You see, it's the standard that they want to set. Now, let's move on. Now, let us take the third subject, business. I am afraid I do not know much about it, but I should like to suggest a few ideas that have occurred to me. Experts, naturally, are needed to handle such technical questions as tariffs, banking and exchange, international coinage, and a common script and language for the world. Excuse me. I'm going to pause for a second here. Did you catch all of that? So he's talking about banking and exchange, international coinage, a common language for the world, one world currency, one world language, tariffs, all of these things. You see, they need experts to handle that. Once again, using the concept that we need some kind of specialized system in place to handle this, and some really smart people to run the system, ones that know better than everyone else. Throw out all the common sense in the world and let's apply the rules in this way. That's what's being said here. So let's read on here. Some of you in the audience have studied these problems and could illuminate them from a theosophical point of view. The whole world is trying to tackle these problems today, but the experts look at them from an irreligious point of view, and therefore do not touch the foundation. We, theosophists, believe in a religious foundation for life in its entirety. We must solve these intricate and delicate problems through our theosophy. Gonna pause for a moment here, folks. So this same person that's ridiculing religion and saying it's the cause of all problems says it's also necessary in order to bring about this harmonious one-world system. So it's their religion's the right one, you see. Their religious convictions are right. It's everybody else's wrong. So everybody has to accept their ideals, their religion, in order for it to work. Do you see? It's not really solving the problem or addressing the problem. It's doubling down on the problem. And that's the thing. These people can't see past the nose on their face with this stuff. They have this attitude, this idea that their way is true, and they criticize everybody else for thinking the same thing, right? Their religion's the only true one. And if everybody followed it, then everything would be harmonious. So, and how could we make them see our religion as being the correct one? Well, I don't know if we'll get into that in this reading or not, but that's certainly what they've sought to do. They've sought to transform religious ideals in this world to fit the mold of just one commonality, to bring about this change in the world. And I don't know if we'll get to that tonight, but that's a subject for another time. Let's read on, though, and see what he says here. We must have our ideas and conceptions for the solution of all these problems. We cannot leave them aside for others to work out who are not religious. We must try to establish an international board to control the commerce of the world, not for the profit of a chosen few, but for the entire world. Gonna pause for a moment here, folks. This sounds like a whole lot of World Economic Forum garbage, doesn't it? We have to establish an international board to control the commerce of the world, but, not for the profit of a chosen few, but for the greater good of the world, you see. This is what these people do. They claim one thing and then do the complete opposite. So we'll set up shop, we'll set up all these foundation groups, these, non-profit foundations, and all of these different think tank groups and these philanthropic organizations that funnel money to special interest groups and say it's for the greater good. That's exactly what's been done in the name of this. And they do have an international board that does this stuff. It's called the Bank of International Settlements. You see, the World Bank. The whole financial system is based upon this ideology to one degree or another. But, they don't necessarily show religious ideals in the way that they present themselves to the public within these different business forums. That would be unprofessional. And that might be something that's offensive to some. And therefore, we might not have their trust if we happen to show our true colors of what kind of philosophy we espouse or religious ideals we espouse. So they don't do that. But have no doubt about it, underlying all of these control systems that are in the world, there is a religious foundation, and they won't call it a religious foundation. It's a spiritual foundation, and they won't acknowledge it as that either. But it is definitely there, and it is this that the Theosophical Society is talking about and was promoting here. And this goes through all the different occult fraternities. It's the same thing underlying all of it. It's the same spirit that undergirds all of it. This esprit de corps, as the author here described it, the spirit of death, which he translates as the spirit of cooperation. So cooperation to these people is code word for a spirit of death, the death cult. Adherence to the ideology of the death cult. You see, compliance with the death cult. That's what cooperation is. And I believe Marx defined peace as being the absence of resistance to socialism. So keep that in mind. This is the kind of mindset they have going through this stuff. But let's continue reading. I don't want to put words in their mouth because I think the words that are just here in black and white on the page should be enough to really paint the picture for you. Let's read on. We must have our ideas and conceptions for the solution of all these problems. We cannot leave them aside for others to work out who are not religious. We must try to establish an international board to control the commerce of the world, not for the profit of a chosen few, but for the entire world. A curious thing is happening now in the West. The Allies are drawing near to their former enemies, the Germans, whom they so much hated and abused. Great German financiers are coming over to what was known as the enemy country, England, to arrange credits and organize trusts on an international scale. But unfortunately, this internationalism is at present strictly for the benefit of a few very rich people. Gonna pause for a moment here, folks. It always has been and always will be. Internationalism is only for the elect, you see. The elite of this world, the ones who consider themselves this. The Olympians, as they like to call themselves. That's what it's all about. They're the ones who want this type of control and power. That's who benefits and reaps the rewards of internationalism or globalism. The elite class, the ruling class, you see. Always been this way, always will be. And he's pointing out the obvious here. And, of course, they always claim to have the good intentions here. So let's continue reading and see what else he says. Thus, international action is being forced upon us, though it is carried out in the wrong spirit, for an immoral purpose, i.e. to exploit the poor, the needy, the suffering, and this method, if it continues, will inevitably lead us to another war. And I'm going to pause for a moment here, folks. He wasn't wrong. It did lead to another war. Now, was he, especially astute in his understanding of world affairs? Was he a prophet? Or was he one of the ones that was in on the planning of a Second World War? You gotta ask these questions. Let's read on, though. We Theosophists have a special role to play in preventing these things. We must understand the problem and must have our technical experts who will explain to us what is wrong, and then we must create, through magazines, through lectures, through propaganda of every description, a public opinion which is theosophical. I'm going to pause for a moment there, folks. I'm going to read that last sentence again. I don't think I need to really expound on it much, do I? Let me read that again. We must understand the problem and must have our technical experts who will explain to us what is wrong, and then we must create, through magazines, through lectures, through propaganda of every description, a public opinion which is theosophical. Okay, so did you catch that? So here we go, propaganda. They intend to propagandize the public with their theosophical belief system. They've done that. in many ways. They hit us over the head with their beliefs every day, especially now in the modern era. We've seen how far things have come. How far it's been pushed on us through the propaganda and everything else. And you'll notice here he points out that in order to understand the problem, they need to have technical experts who explain what's wrong to them. Because they can't see for themselves that there's a problem or what's wrong. So they must have a group of quote-unquote experts pointed out to them. And this is the type of society we've fallen into, where we rely upon quote-unquote experts to tell us everything and direct us in what to do for the greater good. You see how they inculcate these ideas in subtle ways, and they socially engineer this into the society as a whole. So you have your experts, your wise men, who direct these activities and tell people what it is they need to do. And it must align with the groupthink here, the theosophical viewpoint. That's the necessity, you see. They think they're doing the world a favor by pushing their ideals on them. They think they're the only correct ideals. And that's the bottom line here. So that's what they push, and these are the foundational truths upon which the whole concept of globalism are built. It's upon these foundations in the occult, occultism, theosophical teachings, these different teachings that they present, their viewpoints, their beliefs, their thoughts and opinions on religious ideologies. All of these things are inherent in this, and on human nature. They're reflections on what they think human nature is all about. So let's continue reading, though. Now, let us take the fourth subject, which is a rather tender subject, patriotism. Hinduism has taught us the doctrine of reincarnation, but Theosophy alone explains truly and clearly what is meant by reincarnation. Gonna pause for a moment here, folks. In case you were wondering what reincarnation is, well, the Theosophists will explain it to you, because all those other ideas or definitions of what reincarnation is totally wrong, right? It's only the Theosophists, it's only the Theosophical Society that knows what it is and teaches the proper teaching about it, you see. So this is what's being presented here. So let's see what it is that the Theosophical Society regards as being a truth about reincarnation here, and how it plays a role in what they call patriotism, which goes hand in hand with religion, goes hand in hand with education, goes hand in hand with business. Remember the 4 points that they aligned here? Religion, business, education, and patriotism. The 4 things that stand in the way of one world government that they intend to address and bring together under their banner of this system. So let's read on and see what he says here about reincarnation. We Hindus are still content to believe that we are an especially honored race, who reach moksha naturally, and who are always reincarnated in this country, in India. We also have, curiously, the belief that Brahmanas will always be Brahmanas, and still more curiously, if we are men now, that we shall always be men and never women. That is why we treat our womenfolk in such a shameful and disgraceful way. If we really believed and practiced this theory of reincarnation, our ladies would not always occupy the background as they do at present, and only appear when they are wanted. We are narrow because we do not put our principles into practice. Luckily, Theosophy demolishes completely this absurd theory that we should always remain Brahmanas or Shudras or pariahs because we happen to wear those particular bodies in this life. On the contrary, it teaches us very distinctly and clearly that we shall be born in every country, and even sometimes as women. Gonna pause for a moment here, folks. So, now, the Theosophical Society, Theosophy, teaches that this more traditional idea of what was reincarnation in the old Eastern religion and the old Eastern ways is wrong, and that everybody will be born into every caste, and will evolve to the next higher caste. And this comes from these secret society groups. Same teachings throughout all of them. Just like I said, they put different lipstick on a pig, maybe call it by a little bit different name, but it's all the same teaching. So they teach that reincarnation, you come back over and over and over again, and sometimes, depending upon what you did in your past life or what your past life karma is, maybe you'll come back in a better place or a worse place. But you should show compassion because, that could be you, right? In your next life or something like that. And these kind of teachings are clearly something that's taught through all these occult fraternities, the idea of reincarnation. So now, this gives people a hope. Those in the lower caste system, it gives them hope, you see, that they didn't have prior, because they thought they would always come back into the same caste, to the same different type of problems that they've had before, over and over again. Now, this gives them a renewed hope of something better in an afterlife of sorts, in a life after this one. And keep in mind, the secret society groups that teach this are also the same ones that mock Christians for believing that they have hope beyond this present life, that they could have something better in an eternal afterlife. They're the same ones that mock these ideas. This is truly what you would call the double standard, isn't it? But yet, these are the same ones that apply this reasoning to these different things. See? Now, do you see the hypocrisy in all of it? Do you? Because they try to teach in paradoxical ways, once again, as taught before here. So, that being the case, but this is what they teach. They teach that, sometimes you come back in a different caste or as a different gender or this kind of thing, and we should all be kind to one another. And that's not a bad thing to teach, that we should all be kind or considerate to one another, right? But it's what they teach as to the reasoning behind it here that becomes problematic, especially when it's counter to what they say about other religious ideals, you see. Let's continue reading here. The purpose of reincarnation is to give experience to the soul, and for this purpose we must be born into different nations, into different castes, and different sexes. How absurd, then, judged from this standpoint, is the patriotic cry, "My country, right or wrong?" In moments of crisis, patriotism always overrides our principles, puts our conscience to sleep, and makes us incapable of judging facts truly. We theosophists, who preach from the housetop the principles of brotherhood, fail lamentably in upholding the main object of our society. Even theosophists in allied countries were not immune from the poisonous wave of hatred caused by the war. I see smiles of superiority from Indian members of the society because they did not hate the poor Germans, but believe me, our turn has come when we must show of what stuff we are made. We see hatred raging against the Englishmen in India, just the same hatred as existed in England against the Germans. It is our duty, if we are real theosophists and upholders of brotherhood, the duty of each one of us to stem the surging tide of unbrotherliness, not only within ourselves, which is more difficult to do, but also in the outside world. Now, friends, we have examined some of these problems which stand in the way of the unity of all nations. I want you to understand what is meant by true internationalism. An internationalist is he who lives not like an ordinary man, but like a superman, knowing himself as a god and saluting the god in all other men. I'm going to pause for a moment here, folks. Now, their true colors shine through brilliantly, don't they? Let me read that again. An internationalist is he who lives not like an ordinary man, but like a superman, knowing himself as a god and saluting the god in all other men. That is true internationalism. We must aim at finding the divinity in each man, forgetting the trivialities and pettinesses that present that at present hide the light and magnificence of the supreme God in him. Treat each man as you would treat the Buddha, or Sri Krishna, or Christ. Thus only will you understand and at last develop the true compassion that heals all wounds and kills the evil both in yourself and others. Behave in your daily life as if you were cherishing the world, and look for the Godhead in the sinner as well as in the saint. It is so easy, so frightfully easy, to be brotherly with the saint, but it is more difficult to find the beauty of divinity in the sinner. Let our service then be first to the sinner, and lastly to the saint, first to other nations, then to our own. Thus we shall become true internationalists. And is that not the foundation of how America operates? Let's take care of the other nations first. Why do we give so much away to all these other nations? Well, it's because that's the foundation on which internationalism or globalism is built. It's about trying to represent this brotherhood, this universal brotherhood of man, man being God himself, as taught here by the secret schools, by these mystery schools, by these different occult fraternities. How they've carried these ideas over into politics and internationalism, as it were, into the world system. That's what it's about. And these are the foundations upon which globalism is built, folks. It comes directly out of Theosophy and the other secret schools, but that was a pretty good outline of how they sought to infiltrate into these different areas of reasoning within the world. Those four foundational aspects here that were standing in the way of one world governance: education, religion, patriotism, and business. They've infiltrated all of these areas. They've instantiated their belief systems into all these areas, and they've pushed them through the course of time, slowly socially engineering the masses into acceptance of their ideologies here. And we're at the precipice now of seeing this come to full fruition, because they have all the systems in place now. And the morale of the people, and the spiritual morale of the people, their religious attitudes and ideals have been degraded enough that they will accept this type of ecumenism presented by the world system here, to be accepted into the state, this one world governance system, with this unified banking system, this unified one world currency, one language, one people, one world, one united world. Doesn't that sound nice? Didn't they have a giant banner at the 2021 Olympic Games that were held in China, the Winter Olympics, where it said something about one world, one people, one world, or something like that? It's all these ideas foreshadowed once again, and all these different things, and presented in various ways to engineer the human mind into capitulation with this plan, because these people at the top of the power structure, they seem to think they know better than you, and they want control over you, and they talk really a nice game about international peace and having this type of a system where everybody benefits, but that's not the case. It's only these select few at the top that this whole internationalist idea works for. You see, it's not about the common man. They couldn't care less about you. They see themselves as being an evolutionary step above you, and think they're helping you to get to that next evolutionary step in your path by utilizing these ideas. And this is a dangerous idea to have in mind here. It's a dangerous foundation upon which they've built these things, and it's coming to fruition in front of our eyes. And remember, this text was over 100 years old. They were writing about these things back then in 1921. Put these ideas out there in 1921, and we've seen how they've slipped into our modern era, slowly through the course of time, being accepted generationally, from generation to generation. We're only about maybe 4 or 5 generations removed from there. And pretty much everything that they talked about here has been set up now. And we're at the precipice of rolling over into this new world order, aren't we? So if you ever wondered where'd the idea come from, who decided that they should set up this one world government system, and who decided what exactly should be done within this one world system, well, now you know. It's these occult fraternities. And one of the primary conduits was the Theosophical Society, who set up shop at the United Nations with their publication group, the Lucis Trust, formerly known as Lucifer Trust, but because the name draws a lot of attention, they changed it so as not to harbor too much resentment from the Western Christian world, you see. So these are the ideas that underlie all of it. And these are the foundations upon which things like the United Nations are built, and all the other organizations that go hand in hand with them, notably the World Health Organization, the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, the Bank of International Settlements. All of these different organizations, they're all aligned with this philosophy, folks. Understand it, and you'll understand who the enemy of your soul is. That's the important thing here. It's a spiritual battle. And these people have infiltrated heavily into the power points in this world and have inculcated their ideas upon the world here, have modeled the world after the things they see fit to. And it doesn't align with all of our best interests, just those at the top of the power structure. The Olympians, folks. That's how they view themselves. That's what they call themselves. The ones at the top of the power structure. The ones who really put together all of these agendas in the world today. So anyway, folks, that's what I got for tonight. I hope this was educational and informative. I want to thank you all for tuning in. I appreciate each and every one of you. Have a good night.
Come with me.